Hello everyone, now I'm gonna tell you the story. Snow White. Once upon a time, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a king and queen who longed for a child. One winter's day, as the queen sat by her window sewing, she pricked her finger with her needle. 3 drops of blood fell on the snow outside the window, and she thought, I wish I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the ebony window frame. Soon after, the queen gave birth to a baby girl who was indeed as white as snow, as red as blood, and with hair as black as ebony. They named her Snow White. Tragically, the queen died shortly after Snow White was born, and the king remarried. The new queen was beautiful but vain and wicked. She possessed a magic mirror that she would consult every day, asking, Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? The mirror would always reply, You, my queen, are the fairest of them all. This pleased the queen greatly. Years passed, and Snow White grew up to be a lovely young woman, her beauty surpassing even that of the queen. One day, when the queen asked her mirror the usual question, it replied, You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White is even fairer than you. Enraged with jealousy, the queen ordered a huntsman to take Snow White into the forest and kill her. A proof of her death, she demanded that he bring back Snow White's heart. The huntsman led Snow White deep into the forest but could not bring himself to harm her. He told her to flee and never return to the castle. He then killed a deer and took its heart to the queen, pretending it was Snow White's. Snow White wandered through the forest, frightened and alone. Eventually, she came upon a little cottage belonging to 7 dwarfs. Inside, she found 7 little chairs, 7 little beds, and everything arranged in 7s. Exhausted, she lay down on one of the beds and fell asleep. When the 7 dwarfs returned home that evening, they were surprised to find Snow White asleep in one of their beds. She awoke and told them her story, and the dwarfs took pity on her. They offered her shelter in exchange for her help with the household chores. Snow White gratefully accepted and lived happily with the dwarfs, growing ever more beautiful. Meanwhile, the queen, believing Snow White to be dead, once again consulted her mirror. To her horror, it replied, You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but Snow White, beyond the mountains with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you. Enraged, the queen devised a plan to kill Snow White herself. Disguising herself as an old peddler woman, the queen visited the dwarf's cottage and offered Snow White a lace bodice. When Snow White put it on, the queen laced it so tightly that Snow White could not breathe and fell down as if dead. When the dwarfs returned home, they found Snow White and managed to revive her by cutting the laces. The next day, the queen learned from her mirror that Snow White was still alive. Furious, she returned to the cottage, this time disguised as an old woman selling combs. She gave Snow White a poisoned comb, which caused her to fall into a death-like sleep. Once again, the dwarfs returned in time to save her. Undeterred, the queen tried one final time. She made a poisoned apple and disguised herself as a peasant woman. She offered Snow White the apple, and when Snow White took a bite, she fell into a deep, death-like sleep. This time, the dwarfs could not revive her. Believing her to be dead, they laid her in a glass coffin in the forest, where they kept watch over her. Time passed, and one day a prince, who had heard of Snow White's beauty, came to see her. Struck by her lifelike appearance, he asked the dwarfs if he could take her to his castle. As his servants carried the coffin, they stumbled, dislodging the piece of poisoned apple from Snow White's throat. She awoke, and the prince, overjoyed, declared his love for her. Snow White agreed to marry him. The wicked queen was invited to their wedding, unaware that the bride was Snow White. When she arrived and saw Snow White alive, she was struck with fear and rage. As punishment for her evil deeds, she was forced to wear red-hot iron shoes and dance until she fell down dead. Snow White and the prince lived happily ever after, and their kingdom flourished in peace and joy. See you next episode. Thank you for your watching. Please like, share, and subscribe.